Hi, I'm Martina Jewell and welcome to today's webinar. I'm very delighted to be joined by the amazing Alan Parker, OAM.
Lovely to be here.
And Alan is a behavioural scientist, a neurobehavioural scientist. And today the whole point of this webinar is actually part of the Authors for Fireys Relief Fund effort. I had an amazing lady, Michelle, who actually won my auction as an author that came as a book, my online leadership program, and also a one-on-one coaching session. Michelle was so generous, and I was really touched by her generosity that she wanted to actually pay forward the coaching session to potentially to one of the firefighters. And we had an opportunity then to have a discussion around how we could actually broaden that experience to not just be one person who would benefit from a conversation, but opening it up to as many people who wanted to be involved in a conversation around what's happening with the fires. So we've thrown it open to a live webinar. We actually also have an audience. Maybe Alan, you can explain the audience we have here today with us.
Thank you, Maddie. I'd like to start by saying Maddie and I, almost since we first met, had a sense that we'd do something together. And I'm thrilled we're here doing that something together. The environment that we're carrying the webinar through is on a program called the Experimental Laboratory. And it's a group of people who meet in 7 different cities every second month for a day of immersion into possibility and potential. And the group who are here are one of those groups. And we're committed to exploring what's possible, what's the potential that sits inside of us and in front of us, and what is it that we don't see that we could see, what is it that we don't hear that we could hear, that if we mobilise that we could create extraordinary new things. That would be how I'd describe it.
Yeah, fantastic. And so we've had a couple of technical issues. We were going to show a video to actually set the scene as to why we're here today, but we're working on those technical issues in the background. And once we've got that, we'll pop back into showing that video. But the whole point of today is kind of open those discussions. I think, the extraordinary experience we've had in Australia over this Christmas period, and the conversations that I've been having, Alan, with people, I think, everyone in some shape or form has been affected by the bushfires in this country.
Indeed.
And so there's the people that have been personally affected in those communities. And then also a lot of people that are sitting back wanting to support in some way, some form, and feeling a little bit helpless in many regards. And so I thought it might be nice to kind of have some conversations around how we can have better conversations with people and things that we might be able to do to support.
Can I have a go at linking that to an experience of feeling helpless? And then I've got a question I want to start by asking you, if I can do that. Perfect. 5 years ago I had a significant health condition, and the result of it was I had ended up with damaged lungs, permanently damaged lungs. And just before the end of the year, my last 3 days were in Sydney, and Sydney was shrouded in smoke. I remember being in a corporate office and not being able to see the Harbour Bridge, which was less than half a kilometre away. The result of that is I spent the next week in bed with bronchitis. So you're saying there's a flow-on effect that we don't even think about. A friend of mine and yours, who happens to be your husband, Clint Jewell, who...
I've heard of him.
You've heard of him?
I've heard of him. He pops up every now and then.
He's a cool dude. The thing I love about him is every time you think, we're doing something hot, Clint goes, how about we go? And he always...
takes it another level.
He just keeps going out.
Yeah.
And I was just well enough to get out of bed, and I ran into Clint out in a coffee shop. And I found out he'd just come back from 8 days firefighting at a property that his family had actually owned. And he said to me, how are you? And I said, look, I'm desperately struggling and I don't I don't think I've used that word in 30 years. I said, I am so frustrated. There's a part of me that wants to get on a plane or get in a car and go down there and help. And I know that an hour in the smoking I'd be useless.
Yeah.
So I was lost as to what to do. And he said, I've got an idea. Now, when Clint says I've got an idea, I'm always fractionally nervous. But he said, we've got to start videoing. We've got to put out some videos out to all of Australia. Talking about how do we manage distress, how do we manage the flow-on effect, how do we manage the conversations, how do we manage it when I've got somebody I love who's deeply distressed, they're exhausted, but they're about to go back out again. And I know they haven't eaten enough, and I know they haven't had enough water, and how do I support them in that? Yeah. And I was so frustrated that I said to him, you got a camera? And he said, yeah. I said, let's shoot the first 4. Yeah. Him being him in his marketing hat on, he goes, oh no, we've got to map it out, we've got to storyboard it. And I went, no, we're not. Get the camera and we'll shoot the first 4. And within 20 minutes, we'd shot the first 4. And we're going to continue to shoot 3 or 4 a week for the next year. Yeah. So there's not a person in Australia who can ever say, I don't know what to do. They can go and watch the videos.
That's right. Which I think that takes us back to, where we all want perfection, and sometimes we just don't take action. And at least if we grew 80%, maybe not the 100% product we want, because we may never get to the 100%. It's about taking the action.
Both of us looked at the first 4 and went, oh God, that's awful. And we went to send them out anyway.
Yeah.
And we just went, we've got to get the message out. We've got to let people know we're doing stuff. And in fact, in the first video, I go, we can't take time to plan stuff. We've just got to get on. Yeah. Do what we know we can do now. Yeah. Do what I know I can do now, and knowing that what I know of you, and having been a major in the military, in charge of a large number of men, particularly, at a very young age. Yeah. And I know that you, from there, were involved in UN peacekeeping, and you had a few curly little situations there. Yeah. I think the question of how do we all deal with the hardship, make the decision to go and do something and not have immobilisation. Yeah. So that's right. Can I ask you, from your extraordinary background, what's one of those situations where all of a sudden you were dropped in, you didn't choose it, you were there? Yeah. And can we just explore that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Aline?
For sure, Alan. I think across my 15-year career in the Australian Army as an officer, most months there was some sort of extraordinary situation that you were faced with. But probably one of the stories I think probably comes to mind right now is with that United Nations peacekeeping role. So I was very fortunate to represent Australia on that mission for 13 months, 7 months in Syria, 6 months in Lebanon, where I was the only Australian and also the only woman in my patrol regions at those bases in both those countries. So working with 23 different nationalities, in Arab countries, in very hostile environments.
And you are naturally blonde, and you were then.
Yeah, and blue eyes.
Stood out a little.
So yeah, trying to blend in with the crowd sometimes a little bit more challenging for me than some of the boys. But right at the end of that mission, I had 2 weeks left of that posting with the UN. I was due to return home to Australia. My very last patrol, in fact, I was supposed to come off the base the very next morning, and unfortunately the Hezbollah started this massive war with Israel. So we went from, in a split second, monitoring a peace agreement that I had been, part of in a military capacity for nearly 13 months, to suddenly the environment changed from monitoring a peace agreement to being in the thick of the receiving end of, a full-scale warfare. So, we suddenly, in a matter of minutes, went from observing a relatively sustainable, peaceful situation to being on the receiving end of fighter jets, attack helicopters, Merkava tanks, artillery fire, and having to play our role and do the job that we're sent to do in those environments. But suddenly very changed, rapidly in a moment. So it was that, surprised environment.
Yeah.
And I guess probably the one of the situations that drew out of that, a week into that war, I was then tasked to command a convoy of armoured vehicles through the war zone, 2 armoured personnel carriers and 16 Indian and Ghanaian infantry soldiers that I had under my command in that convoy. And these are soldiers I'd never met before. So you find yourself in that sudden leadership capacity with a team that you don't know how's going to respond in those environments, and having to step up and lead and find a whole lot of skill sets you may or may not have known that you had. Yeah. In a crisis situation, and knowing that you, at the very least, you need to keep a capacity and momentum of your decision-making ability to make decisions and hopefully save lives in those environments. But I guess, it's a different from a firefighting situation or being suddenly found in a bushfire, but it's that, I guess it's that a similarity in terms of that sudden, unexpected environment. There's a whole lot of unknowns, and you as an individual have to make some decisions that you're not really 100% sure about how that will all play out. But you have a role to play and you have to be decisive.
So if I were to summarise that, you're doing what you do as your normal business process.
That's right.
What you're required to do. And all of a sudden something else arrives and that flicks that out or on its ear, and now you've got something 50 times more difficult, more dangerous, more challenging. Right in that first moment where you went, whoops, it's not, it's now. What was the first thing you did? Now just watch. She just demonstrated to you. What'd she do?
Breathe.
The brain went, if you want best performance, you breathe. And it's quite an automatic response. It's actually the brain's wisdom going, if you're going to do this well, you need oxygen in your brain. Lovely. Took a breath and
breathe. And really focus. There's nothing like incoming rounds to focus your attention on what you need to do that day.
Now, can I just check, rounds are a euphemism for bullets?
Or bombs.
Or bombs?
Yep, big bombs. So in the first hour of the war, we had an Israeli fighter jet fire a 1,000-pound aerial bomb that blew up a Hezbollah base that was only 75 metres from us. I was actually up on the rooftop of Kiam at the time, so no overhead protection on that basis. A little bit of a design flaw with that particular UN post. And that round, these bombs are massive, like they're over 3 metres long. I can still visualise those stabilising fins at the rear of this projectile. It was no more than 30 metres away from me at eye level. Like it felt like I could put my hand out and touch this huge bomb as it came past us to blow up that Hezbollah base. And we're completely exposed. And obviously a moment that would have happened in a split second just felt like it was happening in slow motion around me. But I guess I breathed, hopefully, and just had enough time and presence to be able to tell my teammates that were unaware of what was happening to get down as that blast wave. The fireball literally went over our heads. It was like we're in an earthquake. The whole base was shook by the blast wave from that explosion.
Can I interrupt for a sec? Because as a neurobehavioural scientist, I'm sitting listening to you and thinking, this is textbook behaviour. Now, I suspect you did a little bit of practice and rehearsal for this to come off. So I'm not suggesting it was natural talent. But there's
a whole lot of luck involved, Alan.
I'm doing something and then bingo, all of a sudden it's a completely different game and there's bullets and bombs and going on. And the first thing I do is breathe. The second thing I heard you say is I had to pay attention to me and be aware of what I needed to do. So it was me focused first to increase my awareness. And then you went wide to who are the people I need to manage here in this situation. So you've resourced yourself with oxygen, considered you and made your best choice, then immediately went to everybody.
Looking after the team.
And how do I do inclusion in my next step?
Absolutely.
Wow. Does it fascinate you that just
Well, I've never had anyone break that down like that. So I'm sort of like, and I guess it is, there's training, but I think, and particularly as a leader in those environments, simulation is one thing.
Yes.
Plenty
Yes.
of operations out, training exercises with the
Yeah.
military, preparing for those environments where they really want to put you under that stress and pressure. To see how your decision capacity is
Yeah.
in those moments where there's chaos.
Yeah.
And you need to somehow find that way to break through the chaos
Yeah.
so that you can respond rather than react
Yes.
in those environments.
Because that must be immensely important, that distinction
Yeah.
between choose a response and respond accordingly,
Yeah. Rather than
not do.
well, it's
do
pretty
the
bad on the
reaction.
team's morale if the leader bursts
Yeah.
into tears and runs the opposite way. We're all going to die.
Yeah.
But I think, throughout my entire 15-year career, and I'd served on 4 missions before this
Yes.
particular one. So I'd been in some pretty, chaos environments before that. But there was always this question mark in the back of my mind that how would I respond in those critical moments? I've had all this
Yeah.
training, but will
Yeah.
it really kick in?
Yeah.
And I don't think you can answer that question for yourself until you've had that lived experience.
Yeah.
Until you've been in that moment and been able to hopefully keep it together, let the training kick in,
Yeah.
and at least take some form of action.
Given the parallel, because the people down involved in the fires whose properties are burning, the people in the departments who are looking after the forests, the people who are looking after the biodiversity, they're all there, and all of a sudden something's arrived that they hadn't been counting on. Big.
Yeah,
So there's a parallel
yeah,
here. And you've been fortunate enough to have a reasonable amount of preparation. However, nothing's ever enough when you've got
no,
a 3-metre bomb
yeah.
at 30 metres.
And it's that suddenness and a dramatic shift in the environment. And I guess that's
Yeah.
what's been happening to our communities in these environments with the
Yeah.
fires, where it's gone from a normal day, a lot of it unfolded on New Year's Eve. People are planning their parties, they're
Yes.
looking forward to the new year, and then all of a sudden, where they thought they would be, they're now over here faced with this situation. And
Yeah.
how you get them through that environment, get through the threat,
Yeah.
and then how you rebuild on the back of it.
Yeah. Let's assume for a minute that you're a mum in southern New South Wales or Gippsland area, and you've got 3 or 4 kids. The fire's on its way, you've been smelling it for days, the kids are coughing,
Yeah,
and all of a sudden you've been put on warning that you've got to evacuate.
yeah.
What would be, having been through what you've been through and being able to look back at it and learn from it,
Yeah.
what would be your advice to that mum? Or what would you be your advice to the guy who's there holding a hose and fire's coming toward, like your bomb?
Yeah,
Yeah. What would,
yeah.
if you could give them 1 or 2 or 3 steps,
Yeah,
what would it
I think
be?
the key is sort of what we touched a little bit about, about the impact of breathing in those moments, just taking control of something that you do have control of, because the rest of what's happening around you, you can't control. For me, there was that sense of responsibility as a leader of these environments, knowing that I was making decisions that were going to impact on the lives of 16 soldiers that I was commanding at the time.
Yeah.
In some ways, that was actually beneficial to me as a leader, because it helped me kind of disassociate emotionally from what was happening around me.
Right.
My-
But can I say, by you attending externally to them,
Yeah.
it actually put you into a better state because you're the observer rather than the experiencer. Is
Yeah,
that
I think that's
too
I think it's an
simplified?
accurate- No, I don't think too. I think it's quite an accurate description of what sort of would happen for me anyway in this situation. That my biggest fear wasn't being injured or killed myself if the environment was happening. It was that my biggest fear was if I made a decision as the leader that would result in the injury or death of one of my people.
Yeah.
And so that helps you keep really focused and sharp on what's happening.
Now just watch, there was another, what's happening, and then there was another breath.
Yeah.
It's pretty well trained in if you, but it's so important for us to, if I can pull out of that, biologically, the three substances that you and I need to function, in fact stay alive, but to function optimally as a human being. Number one is water, number two is oxygen, and number three is glucose. Yeah.
Yep.
So if I'm taking a breath and I just have a glass of water,
Yeah.
and I've had a piece of bread 10 minutes ago to give me the glucose,
Yep.
the brain will, with those three things, will work more effectively.
Mm.
And the more I do what you're doing is breathing in and breathing out fully, the byproduct of the burning, the oxygen burning the glucose to give us energy, which is happening a lot when I'm at the fire front.
Yeah.
The byproduct of that is what is called free radicals. Now, if they get into the system, they can cause more fatigue,
Yeah.
pain, muscle soreness and fatigue. But the more I breathe out, so I breathe in and I breathe out, I'm breathing out carbon dioxide, which is freeing the free radicals out of my system. So I'll have more endurance,
Yeah.
and long term I won't be as affected adversely.
Yeah.
The oxygen and water factor is of paramount importance. And then you're able to make those collective decisions, because the front of the brain that makes the decisions is available to do it. And then it's done from consideration, not reactivity.
I was going to say a considered state,
Yeah.
rather than that, as you say, reacting to what's happening, and therefore not making potentially the best options that you have.
And forgive me if I'm being too scientific or clinical, given the extraordinary importance of that and the fireplaces.
Yeah.
But if we get the biology right, we've got
Yeah.
a damn good chance.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm finding it fascinating just hearing the breakdown and the biological reaction of what is an automatic or natural response to me of what I did in those environments, those situations. So going back to your original question about what would be my advice to a mum in that situation, I'd say, because you've obviously got that concern for your own children, but that can actually help that mum in that situation by not having that concern about yourself, your own physical status in that environment, making sure you're making the right decisions for those that you're responsible for.
Yeah.
And so long as they're breathing, getting the oxygen to the brain, they can make those decisions, analyse the options that they have, and go through their process of decision and risk management, and that responsibility piece will guide that. So I think my biggest advice in those crisis situations is keep your momentum moving forward in decision capacity, because even if we make the wrong decision, if we're making decisions, we can just make another one and get back on track. The biggest concern that I've seen of people on the battlefield is when we become immobilised with fear, we get confronted and we can't, we're overwhelmed in that environment. And if we become stagnant in a decision capacity, then it's very hard to make that very first step forward because it's quite a big step. But if we're just making decisions or kind of that, keeping that agility and momentum, then we can get on track even if we make the wrong decision. So,
can I unpack that again?
Yeah, I'd love you to. I'd love you to.
Because I love your term, immobilised by fear. When let's say for instance I'm the mum and I can see the fire coming and I'm packing up the kids and one of them's run off to the bedroom who wants to get something, and all I want them to do is be here. And I hit that point where I'm immobilised by fear. Now, if the stimulus is great enough and I enter fear, and I say I enter fear, not I experience fear, I enter fear, the cortisol just starts pumping, and it either causes me to react and fight, so it gives me lots of energy to do what I need to do, or I run. You'll do your quickest 100 metres ever when cortisol is pumping. You're just not good at 500 metres. And the fear will either make me fight or flight or freeze. Now, in the fire circumstances, the last thing we want is freeze. Now, the moment I've got cortisol, fear, and I freeze, the frontal lobe that makes those important considered decisions that you're talking about isn't working. Because the deeper, just above the brainstem, here there's a thing called the amygdala and the hippocampus.
Yeah.
They're going to make sure that you have enough cortisol and pump it out, and they will immobilise you. Now, you can regulate that purely by keeping your feet flat on the ground, taking your big breath, and let it out and not move, not do anything, not think, and do that again. And the second one will send a message to a piece of your brain called the HPA, and I won't tell you what that means because it's long words. But the HPA is your regulator of cortisol. And you breathe twice, big in and out, stationary, it'll send a message to the regulator and it'll slow the cortisol down. Yeah.
So grounding your feet, getting grounded.
Feet flat on the floor.
Breath in, breath out.
Breath in twice.
Yep.
And
Much
that
more clarity
sends
to
a
make a decision.
message to the regulating mechanism, the HPA, to shut down the cortisol. And it then stimulates the eyes, and you're more inclined to see than feel. And once you stimulate the eyes, the information comes in through the eyes and goes to the thalamus, and it bypasses the amygdala, which fires the cortisol.
Yep.
Yeah? So you're saying, I breathed, I took stock, I considered, and then I looked out and considered my people. The minute you focus on looking, the information comes in, passes through the thalamus, bypasses the amygdala. So the cortisol doesn't come on, but if you continue to breathe, another substance called noradrenaline will transmit, it'll produce the energy without the panic or the anxiety. Isn't it? We're so
Fantastic.
beautifully designed, aren't we?
Yeah, the human body, the function is incredible.
And I think if I were to jump in and go, what's the one thing I would do to somebody, a mum, if I was there, I'm the neighbour and helping, I would just simply go, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Now, just the slightest, tiniest touch on the shoulder triggers what's called your mammalian brain.
Yep.
And the mammalian brain is the relationship affiliation brain. And it then will connect you to me and get your attention external, and your cortisol function will switch off.
Yeah.
But it's not a palm of a hand, it's the tip of a finger.
Right.
And I grab your eye.
Yeah.
We'll be okay with this. Not you'll be okay.
Very sure.
Yeah. Because often my adrenaline gets
like it,
kicked
start
in.
of
It's
it,
going to be
it's like
okay.
it,
It'll
it's
be.
like
And I go, no.
Yeah, you're not reassuring me.
And you'll notice there's no direct eye contact.
Yeah.
It's indirect. The eye's out of the side.
Yeah.
And when the eye's out of the side of the socket, and if I can get your eye out the side of the socket, adrenaline and cortisol won't transmit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
I think for me too, the next step of that, because I didn't have anyone saying it's going to be okay,
You're on
but it
your
was all
own.
me needing to say to the soldiers, it's going to be okay. I've never met you before. You have no idea who I am, but trust me, I'm now going to step up. I'm going to navigate
And
this.
it may be of a culture that you don't touch the male.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
And
certainly they wouldn't have touched me as an officer and as a woman.
Yeah.
It would have been completely against the culture of the military, and particularly the Indian and Ghanaian forces, very respectful. So for me, it was then, there's no one there reassuring me. I was outside my normal team, so I didn't have any support for me. It should have been a 2-hour drive to get from that headquarters, from Kiam, Patrol Base Kiam, into the headquarters. It took 2 days under heavy fire from both sides to get that convoy through. And the majority of that transit, the UN used insecure communications, and in fact we're now in different vehicles, so our comms didn't work with my headquarters. So for the majority of that 2 days, the only way I could contact my headquarters was with my personal Lebanese mobile phone that worked on a prepaid SIM card system. So very different from an Australian Defence Force scenario. Which meant
So you hadn't simulated that one?
No, it was a new experience, and the biggest challenge of my career. And so again, having to think outside the box of even how to get some form of comms, so that and obviously the mobile service range in southern Lebanon's pretty bad at the best of times, but thankfully I'd hosted the Australian ambassador in Lebanon on a number of occasions, had a really good relationship with the embassy, so I'd contacted the embassy and asked them to go and purchase a prepaid SIM card because I was running out of phone credits and there was no shops open for me just to pop in during the war. So, you know, having to think outside the box and kind of put things in place that would normally be a granted procedure. In the You don't think about going on the battlefield without secure communication, cipher encryption, and know that you've got your headquarters providing that overarching guidance and support. So at no stage I was able to get that information from headquarters about what roads were open, what was happening. So it was really left up to me as the commander on the ground to be making a whole lot of decisions and taking actions. And when
And I imagine they're all new and not familiar with you, but I suspect they know you're the commanding officer, and they're making their decisions based on how you present yourself.
Oh, absolutely, and they're looking at you for that.
For the
reassurance. Not the
reassurance.
physical, but that reassurance of it's going to be okay, we've got this, I just need you to do X, Y and Z. So it was about putting on a persona almost. So inside I'm thinking, how the hell did we get into this situation? Looking back at my whole training going, you know, all those training exercises, I never thought I'd ever be in command of armoured vehicles in a war zone, infantry soldiers, it's all gone pretty pear-shaped if that happens, So almost having to provide myself that reassurance because the last thing you want is doubt in your own mind. And so I think the next step would be that reassurance to that mum.
How did you do that? Because that sounds easy. You know, we were all sitting around going, I've just got to keep the doubt out. But
and put on this persona to the team that I've got this. Trust me, follow me. I'm going somewhere I've never been before, but we're going to be right.
How much of that was conscious, considered choice, and how much of it was faking it until you could make it?
There was a lot of faking it.
Was there?
There's a lot of putting that persona on for the team.
Just
but also,
watch the breath again. Just notice how often I've got to step up again to another level, and the pattern's there.
It's normal.
I've got to step up for the team was the last.
Taking the pressure off myself, because I think often we're the toughest critics on ourselves. And almost just reassuring myself in those moments that I can only make the best decision on the information that I have at hand, the training, the skills that I've got. I've just got to give my best and hope for that'll be enough. And that no one, including myself, can have more expectation of me in those moments than just giving my 100%.
There's an aspect of what you're saying there that, you know, we're doing what we were doing, then something arrived and it's a completely different game, and I've got to be composed, I've got to consider the people, I've got to make good decisions, I've got to communicate that out, and we've got to get the momentum going. And then I'm hit with the reality that it's not 2 hours, it's 2 days. So I'm now in acute circumstance for 2 days. What adjustment do you have to make when you realise that you started out to run 400 metres and you've been told 100 metres from the line that they've turned it into a kilometre? And you're near the kilometre and they've said, no, we're going to do 500 kilometres, which is in reality what's happening, both for you and in our current
and I think it's, and I was going to say, I think it's a really good analogy with what's happening with the fires. There's unknown. We're still under threat. There's towns and you know still being impacted right now with that threat experience. I think that the military are very good at this, and that in our training situations, I've had exercise. We've gone outfield. We're actually on the trucks. We're heading back into the barracks. We've gone in one. You know, we're all planning that first shower. You've been 2 weeks outfield. That the shower, the meal we're going to have, the beers we're going to have out at the pub. Your brain has gone into, we've got through this and now we're down tools. And they've driven out one side of the gun gates into the barracks, and they've driven straight through the barracks out the other side and said, welcome to the next exercise. We're now back outfield. And it was that whole, managing that disappointment. We're all feeling that collective like, oh no. Like,
switch it back on again.
Back in, game face, back on. And again, probably that's something we were talking about, something about being affected by what was happening, that change of circumstance. So at least it wasn't the first time my expectations hadn't been met, and having to draw on some energy internally somewhere to then get the whole team of going, okay, that 2 hour drive. And we faced a lot of near misses in that. We had, you know, Katyusha rockets just skimming over the vehicles. We had 1,000-pound bombs blowing stuff up. I was forced to take dirt roads, landmine risk in southern Lebanon. You don't normally take dirt roads, but they were risks that I was having to manage as a leader to at least hopefully get the outcome we wanted of getting to safety. So having to manage a lot of things in that, and also bring the team with you to get them to increase their leverage.
Having done that, let's assume that you're one of the heads of one of the bushfire volunteer units, and you've got 30 guys, and you've got a plan in place, and something happens and the plan's out the door. Not what would you do next, but what's your advice to them when stuff happens? Or they think they've contained it and then bingo, it's leaped across.
That's right.
What have you got to do inside to just go, I'm back again, I'm here, I'm going? What's your advice to those people who don't have the leader role? Which in fact for the country is most of us.
I think it's almost planning the unexpected. I think we come up with plans, and it's vital that we do have strategies and plans. In the military we talk about nothing survives contact with the enemy. So we go in with these scenarios, and then the enemy does something that we hadn't planned.
Didn't calculate.
We train in our people that flexibility of mindset, being able to adapt in those environments to succeed, and also pushing the empowerment of decision making right down to the front line, because often it's a time element. We haven't got time to go right back all the way back to coalition headquarters to get an approval to do something different to what was happening. So we need that culture to empower people to be decisive, take action, manage risks themselves on the ground. But I think it's that expectation of it's not going to play out the way that we want it to. We can have done all this battlefield planning and contingency planning, and then you get confronted with scenario Z that no one's thought would happen. I think that happens on the fire field, that there's things that I think many people never thought this was possible, what's happened over this summer period.
My brain has just flicked back to the video. And the thing that touched me when I first saw the video, and the video is really what stimulated this process happening, that the people in the video, they had something planned, and then all of a sudden it wasn't how.
Maybe can we show that video now? Is it possible? So to probably introduce it, my husband Clint grew up in the Snowy Mountains, in the high country of Victoria. We're actually on our way to a New Year's Eve party, and Clint said, I'm sorry, but you need to take me to the airport. Change of plans. I can't sit back and watch what's happening in Corryong, which is his hometown, that have been under great threat that day. And so, dropped him to the airport. I continued on with the kids for the next couple of weeks, and Clint went down. And this is some of the footage that he took of that experience.
The first fire went through yesterday morning, and then we got news around lunchtime that they'd lost the fire over at Guy's Forest again, and it came right along the back of that forest line you can see there in the pines. About 11:30 came into the eucalypts, and up that gully you can see straight away from us. That turned into a holocaust.
But it was really horrendous when I think of it afterwards. At the time you sort of do things automatically, but the heat, and the wind, it was just about blowing me over if I got out of the car. And there were people everywhere.
They hit the side rolls and then jumped the road, then up the hill to the haystack, and I just went poof. And I didn't know what to do then.
And when the fire actually hit, it was as scary as all hell. The fire ran up the ridge, and then all of a sudden there was just this shower of embers flew out, and they just lit the whole hill up, and the roar was just like a bloody half a dozen bloody 707s now taking off.
apologies, we had some problems with the sound there. We'll play the video again for you guys. And for the webinar, we're filming this, so we'll actually put out and insert the video with the sound, which is helpful.
Yeah. And in fact, as a scientist, I sort of watch that, and having watched it, I know some of the feelings that will take place in your nervous system. And it's really lovely to think that you get to see it in two lots. One is you'll see it without the sound and all you did then was watch. Now the fact that you could only watch went to your thalamus and straight to your visual cortex, which means you could see it but not have the feeling. When we put the sound to it and you see it with the sound, you'll notice how much harder it is to see it, and that your body will start to interfere. And the more you feel, the less you'll see. And it's a fascinating piece of discovery that you can do just monitoring and noticing the two. But it's lovely for me to have watched it then, because that's the first, I saw part of that
That you hadn't
scenery
seen before.
that absolutely had not seen. Yeah.
Yeah. It is.
Which is the indication of how much our feelings will either support what we want to do or not. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was a perfect example of where we plan for something. We've done testing, rehearsal this morning, all running beautifully. Doesn't happen. But there's still a gift in that process, and that we've taken something that we wouldn't have experienced or had a different experience than had it been working the way it should have. But we can flip those things.
If we were to summarise your extraordinary experiences and the parallel between that and the fires, and for people who are either in the acute phase of the fire or were in it a month ago and are now still dealing with the extra work that they left behind, or the emotion that they have associated with it, or the flow-on consequences of it, or I'm the person who sits way, way away from it, watches it on the television, and still finds myself not being able to kick myself out of it. If you could just give 3 really key messages to everybody, not only who's watching, but everyone in Australia, what would Martina's
advice? 3 key
pieces?
I guess I try and distill it down to just 3. I think there's a couple of different phases. There's the immediate action. So if you're in a crisis, you're in that threat environment, I think there's 2 key things that come out of that. That's the breath, being able to make those, to keep your clarity. And secondly is to take action, to take some form of action. Keep making decisions, because the moment we become stagnant, that's when we're immobilised by fear, that's when it all goes pear-shaped.
And redecide if necessary.
And then I think my 3rd piece of advice is for those that have had that lived experience, gone through the crisis, come out the other side, and will have had different impact from that. So from my experience, that second day of transit through the war, we had a situation where we had Israeli fighter jets coming in to bomb. I'd been told by headquarters to expect incoming rounds. I didn't foresee my driver was about to do evasive manoeuvring, and there's no seatbelts in those vehicles. And so I was actually thrown forward into the bulletproof windscreen of my armoured vehicle, which fractured and crushed 5 vertebrae, sustained a number of internal injuries. I ruptured my diaphragm, but was still in a leadership position where I had to still keep making decisions to get us into headquarters.
Can I just pause 1 sec? Did you hear what she just said? No. Raise your hand if you just go, that's worth noting.
But I think
when in catastrophe, not trivialise, but understate it to support your own internal reference. Please keep going.
Thank you. And, a long evacuation process back, it took 15 days to get home to commence treatment for those spinal injuries. And a lot of things went wrong in that evacuation process. And in that period, the base that I'd left had been bombed by a fighter jet, 1,000-pound bomb into the bunker, which actually killed all of my teammates manning that base. So there was a lot of emotions that I found in that period, in that post period of that sense of loss. These guys I'd served with for over a year in the Middle East, they were like brothers. They weren't just colleagues. We lived in these close environments where you're literally putting your life in each other's hands. So there was a huge loss of that. There was that reluctance that I had survived, that survival guilt that I had managed to make it through the war zone even though injured, that felt quite unfair that I had survived, they had lost. I lost my career. Those injuries ended my military career. I was in a spinal brace for about a year. I had a number of battles with the government when I got home, so there was just a lot of loss in a very small period of time, which I think there'll be lots of people who are facing that situation. Similar. And there were a lot of decisions that were made for me at that process that I didn't have say in staying in the Defence Force. I didn't, all of these things were being made, decisions made for me. So there was no control over a lot of what was happening to me. And I hit rock bottom in that period, that whole post-recovery situation. And I think the biggest problem I faced at that time was that severe depression, becoming quite insular in my world and having lost so much, unable to see what was ahead of me or what was worth living for during that period. So my third piece of advice, if anyone is going through that situation, that is feeling that complete overwhelm of rock bottom, having felt like they've just suffered so much loss in a very short period of time, that the year didn't kick off the way they had planned to face into 2020, my advice is when all of those things happened, the best thing that happened for me was finding a new sense of purpose. Finding something new once all of those tags that we kind of like to put on ourselves, or when we describe ourselves, I was an amphibious warfare commander, I was a Navy diver, I was a major in the Army, these were the things that I associated myself with. And when all of that was gone and I was physically broken, it was about finding myself again and finding a new sense of purpose, of something I could rebuild my life towards. So I think purpose, once we've come through the crisis period, really focusing on our purpose, because that will help us get out of our own way.
And to realise that there is loss, that there is a sadness and a grief associated with that, and that's, it's okay, it's not pleasant, but it's okay.
Yeah.
And it's a part of the process, and from there, me go, I gotta find something else to attract me, to pull me, to energise me.
So that you can get into
it's about re-establishing your own identity.
Yeah,
I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's not going to happen overnight. That's going to be a process that you go through that will evolve. But it's finding a little thing and breaking it down to small steps. What's the one thing I can do today that will give me some purpose, help me find new identity, something will put me in a positive mindset. And if it can help other people, it really has a double positive effect. So,
that's comfort to my ears. I love hearing if there was one small thing I could do today. Yeah, I think that's glorious.
Step. What about you, Alan? What would your advice be to people in those communities right now?
That every time I'm in a crisis situation and I come out, to give as much attention to the fact that I'm out, I'm alive and I'm safe. And not overspend too much time going backwards into it. And if I'm going to go backwards into it and talk to you about it, I'm always going to put it over there and I'm going to talk about it there, not it here.
To create that separation from it. So that's
that's, to use Michael Grinder's term, that's then, and this is a new now. And if I can separate that was then, this is now, and acknowledge the gratitude I'm here, because some aren't. And then I join you in yours, is once I get here present now, what's the one tiny thing I can do today that's going to make life easier, simpler, and reduce the pressure and the strain. And my third one is always to breathe. I feel compelled to, given that, I'm your guest today, to not only say it's been a pleasure, but I stand in admiration of your contribution and what you've been through and your willingness to so openly share it. But to honour every person in the country who's been in that parallel role to you,
Yeah,
and there must be hundreds of them,
yeah,
in dealing with the fires that have arrived, not in the plan.
yeah.
And just say to everybody and to you, thank you. I'm
Oh,
deeply grateful.
my
Yeah.
pleasure, and thank you for joining me today. It's been
It's been
fantastic.
fun.
Excellent.
Enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a couple of minutes left that I can open the floor now to you guys that are in the room with us, and also for the people online to ask any questions that you might have of either myself or of Alan or of the room.
Just a couple of comments from the chat, and it's all very complimentary and it's all with much gratitude. Just thank you, Alan and Martina. Thank you for sharing the session. Many thanks, Maddie. Thanks for sharing, and so it goes on.
Okay. Oh, that's wonderful. I'm glad
Thank you.
it helps one person. No questions from the webinar exterior. So anyone in the room that might have a question that, I think we're all impacted.
Amazing, and I'm in awe of you. How did you find it? Did you find it easy to get help for the obvious PTSD that must have stemmed from that dramatic change in your life and those experiences? Was it easy
Yeah.
to get people to understand the need for PTSD help?
Yeah, I'm just going to repeat that question so that the guys that are watching through the webinar wouldn't have heard. So it was a question around PTSD, and was it easy for me to kind of get that, that mental, psychological, emotional support? I think the Defence Force has learnt over time of our history, certainly in Australia, the importance of actually providing that support for our people. So I did have that immediate access in the Defence Force to that help. It was a little bit different for me in that I was on a representation role. So I deployed as an individual to that mission, whereas normally we deploy on missions where we're taking an entire force. And so we actually bring psychologists into the field in the countries that we're in. We'll do a lot of preparation even before we get on whichever means that we transport back to our home country. And there's a lot of what we call decompression training. So we've learnt not to just let people come home and just go straight back to their families, that we actually keep them in barracks, keep that support of the people that have been in those communities. And my advice to people that have been in those fire situations is those communities have been affected, have a benefit in that they've all had this lived experience, that similar sort of fear, loss, tragedy, that they can rally around each other. My big concern is for people that have been potentially on holidays, like Malakuta. There was lots of people on their holidays there that have left that fire environment and gone back to wherever they came from and maybe feeling really isolated, is making sure those people reach out and get that support they need. But yes, thankfully the Defence Force does provide lots of mental health support. It is a bit about breaking through cultural patterns in organisations, and unfortunately as Australians in general we tend to stiff upper lip, and mental health does have that stigma where people are reluctant to try and get some help, whereas we'll obviously go and get help for a physical injury, but there's sometimes resistance and a mental aspect. For me, I really had to work through a lot of that process in order to move forward with my life and be able to not live the Lebanon war every day or at night. Horrific flashbacks of quite extraordinary, horrific things that I'd seen in that battlefield. And you can't ever move forward past those events, those real horrific crisis events in your life, without it affecting you. You carry those experiences forward with you. So sometimes it's about getting the tools to equip you to be able to process what you've seen, heard, experienced, smelt. All of your senses are hypersensitive in those environments. And so, I can still smell the battlefield, smell those environments. So some of that mental health is actually really helpful in that, helping you learn a way to move forward in life that becomes part of you, and hopefully part of you in a way that will be positive and help others. Yeah, a question over here.
Maddie and Alan, thank you, Maddie, for sharing that with us. With the fires and with your experiences, it was immediate. The fires were coming, it was 2 or 3 days. Yet we have a large percentage of our country areas that are still in drought. What would you suggest for their well-being and their way of dealing? Because it seems as if
Can I hear
it just slipped
Yeah.
off the radar.
Yeah.
This is not flippant, but it's real time. I'd invite as many people in the Dubbo area to get to Dubbo because tomorrow I'm running a program in Dubbo to deal with how do we revitalise ourselves, how do we live with the droughts, how do we manage ourselves in and through it. Friday morning I'm doing a breakfast at 7 a.m. and for the rest of the day there's a young farmers conference to handle and talk about exactly that question. That'd be my first thing, because it's nearly 400 people are coming together to have that conversation.
Sorry, what was that question?
The question was, given the fires and happening in a drought, what can we do around the drought that is productive and useful? Yeah. The other side of it because I've been doing quite a bit of work in that area over the last year, my encouragement to people who particularly live east of the range is at least once a month drive 5 hours west in some direction, because you can't have any sense of what drought means until you've... 2 months ago was doing some work out at Walgett, and I was driving a truck, what I call a truck, they'd call it a utility. Everything's relative. I was driving a truck and I'd bought 155 litre bottles of water to take with me to Walgett because they had no water. And I was driving along and this cleared what looked like land that you'd normally have wheat on. And it was almost grey. And I was fascinated by it. It went on for ages and ages. And I thought, I've got to stop the truck and get out. This just doesn't make any sense. Because it should be orange. But it was sooty grey. And so I pulled the truck up and I got out, and I'm in city clothes. I'm in black trousers and black shoes. And I walked and I took 3 steps and I was up to here in dust. Almost to my knees after 3 or 4 steps. And all it was the residue of dust storms. Mm. And you just, we haven't got a clue. Haven't got a clue. Now, dust that deep, 3 metres in, is going to be dust that deep somewhere in the middle of the field. And somewhere in the next year, hopefully it'll rain, and that's going to be washed away so that we can have new crops planted.
So you both could make a series of videos about drought. We hope we can provide some contribution.
I think that's the hard thing for farmers, is this perpetual, it's one thing after another. It's like, that experience of having gone through, just got out of drought conditions, had a bumper crop, about to take the cattle off to markets, and then a fire comes through and wipes out. Gone. You're finally about to get out of debt with the bank, and then it's just all gone. And it's finding that resilience to start again. And I think, there's a massive crisis in our farming communities right now, and a mental health, going into their mental health, where people have had to build resilience so many times. It's like, can you find it again? And I think it's, finding that purpose to take that small step to do something positive the next day, help somebody else in the process, and rebuilding in those communities that just continue. And then the next thing will no doubt be a flood will come through. They've had drought, fire, a flood or a cyclone, and it's, it's the next thing they've got to face, and it's that unpredictable nature. That finding that strength within them and as communities to rebuild after so many tragedies. And that takes extraordinary human beings to do that.
Part of my talk on Friday at the conference is a piece called Beyond Resilience. Because I think farmers that have been affected by the drought are way beyond resilience. Because resilience implies that I've gone down and got back up. They don't go down. And one of the things I'll talk about is I've been an ultramarathon runner. I've run 24 hours twice. And the thing the gift that gave me and continues to give me is that it's one of those strange situations where you know, it's not about bouncing back, it's about not going down to have to bounce back. Because, and the way you do that in that setting, you know, 18 hours into a run, all you focus on, and it's beautiful, it's meditative, all you focus on is the next foot is the left one, the next one's the right. And while ever I stay purely in the moment, those choices that Maddie talks about is ever present. It's when I project and go, oh, I can't do another 2 hours, that it's really hard work. Yeah. But it's our ability to keep, if I can steal Maddie, I love Maddie's word, got to keep the momentum going. Yeah. Resilience is when you stop having the momentum start again. But mentally, if we can go, I'm just going to keep stepping up. Yeah. And do whatever small thing I can do. Yeah. And not focus on what I can't do. Yeah.
Can I just add to that before we get into the next question? I just, in the Army we talk about, particularly when commanders were lost outfield, we'd just say it's another 700 metres. Like, because it was like this distance that no one knew exactly how far 700 metres was. 1 kilometre seemed too far,
yes,
but everyone can push through another 700 metres.
Yeah.
So it was almost a, you know, bringing the team's mindset back. We can just push forward another little bit, and we might end up having to do another 10Ks because we could have, you know, really.
But you do it in 700.
No, we're just doing it, 700, and so it breaks it down. It's almost that mindset. And a lot of the corporates I've worked with actually use that analogy now. It's just another 700 metres because we can do 700. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. Catherine and then Zoran.
Thank you.
Zoran.
I'm extremely grateful for the process, Maddie, that you've shared, or that we've unpacked.
Yeah.
That's beautiful, thank you. And my question is actually related to watching the video, how our visual stimulation did not engender a kinesthetic sense. But when we added the auditory channel, you're telling us, the kinesthetic sense will be highly stimulated.
It might be.
Might be.
Might be.
So I haven't been aware of that, and I wonder if you could speak a little more on that.
Yeah, it's the question is, when the video came on and there was no sound, Catherine's identifying that she could watch it and there was no what we call visceral response. Now, the lovely thing about that, Catherine, and this is part answer to the PTSD, if I can look back and tell you about the trauma there and what I saw, not what I felt, I can actually describe it and honour it without the visceral experience. Now, that means that if and the science of it, I'm repeating myself, but if I can focus on what I see, and I use my eyes as my primary filter, the information goes through my thalamus to the visual cortex, and it doesn't go to the emotional reward system. Now, I think that has profound implications to planet Earth. Instead of me going, oh, my feelings, or my belief is, or if I go, what I saw first, the likelihood of me giving you factual information about what happened rather than my experience of what it was. If anybody's in the insurance business, they know that's their biggest problem. They can't get the facts because people were so in the experience. But if I can see it, describe it, I'll actually have much more accurate recall on it.
And a far more appropriate response.
Yeah. Now, if you watch some of the questioning I did with Maddie, I went, in that circumstance, what did you actually do, think or feel? So I put it over here so she could see it and described it here in the present about what it was then. And then I asked her to migrate it and apply it to the fire. And that way, it's allowing her to be free of reliving the experience.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Lovely. Zoran.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing. It was amazing to hear your experience and the tools that you've used. When you talked about that you hit that, don't hit rock bottom, you had the injuries and sustained that, and your whole world just completely changed.
Yeah.
How did you find your purpose?
Okay. Yeah. So the question for any viewers that are still with us on the webinar, the question was around how did I find that purpose at rock bottom, that moment? For me, it was a process that, I'm in a spinal brace. Every day I had gotten to a situation where I was fetal position, shower floor, negative mindset, having a bit of a woe is me moment of like, why has all this happened to me? I was on this great career, I had all this success ahead of me.
Just so. It's not quite indulgent, is it?
Yeah. And I'd gotten to a state too where I didn't even bother moving from bed to the lounge room to watch television all day. I just stayed in bed, I stayed in my pyjamas. It was like this real negative spiral. And I think that the problem with depression, those mental health situations, is that from my lived experience was I became so selfish and self-centered of what was happening to me. I couldn't see the impact I was having on all the people that love me. And everyone who had said to me, oh, Maddie, you've got these great skills, you can go and do something else, you've got so much ahead of you. I was so focused still on the negative aspects. I was focused on all the things I'd lost, all the things I'd worked damn hard to have those experiences and success in my life was all gone and I didn't have a say in it. And because I was focused on the negativity, I couldn't see what I did have to live for. And I think once you get into that stage where you're in this darkness, consumed, you're not even hearing other people around you. So when I'm talking to my groups, I often talk about, as people supporting, hang in there, but try and help them find their own inner fighting spirit. Because my experience was that turnaround process had to be self-initiated before I could use, and I had an extraordinary support network around me. But till I made that decision to turn things around, they were really wasting their energy. It was great they supported me and hung in there. And it was on the shower floor that I had this split-second moment of the impact I was actually having on Clint. We had met just before I deployed on this UN mission. He's a marketing guy, he's not military. He's not even an outdoorsy kind of guy. He's not tech. And so for a very brief second I had this experience of not just being so self-centered, and I decided that he had reluctantly stuck by me even though I kept telling him to go. He didn't sign up for this. I'm not the girl that he fell in love with. And so I had this moment where I thought and considered other people and I wasn't just so focused on myself. And so I made a decision at that point that he deserved at least a little bit of the girl that he fell in love with. And it was that moment that I decided that I needed to do something the next day, just some small step that would help me get out of this negative, give me something to do, because I'd gone from this incredible privilege of commanding soldiers on operations overseas to now being on the shower floor. And so I made a decision that I would iron Clint a business shirt the next morning before he went off to his corporate job. He headed up Whiskers cat food brand at the time, so before he went off to Mars to work at that job, I actually got myself out of bed, I ironed him a shirt, and that small act did two very powerful and quite positive things for me. And that one, it got me out of bed, and when I was in a spinal brace, huge achievement to have just done that step. But it also helped somebody else in a small way. He was quite grateful for the fact that he didn't have to iron his own shirt. And for me, it gave me that, and I think it was more that helping others that gave me that sense of a positive sense about myself, that I'd actually done something that had actually made somebody else's life a little bit easier that day, and I still had that capacity to positively impact somebody. And so it was then just each day adding to ironing shirts or doing something else, just finding a new little thing that I could do to help. And that then gradually over time ended up being an advisor to the Prime Minister, sitting on the Prime Minister's Advisory Council, advising on defence and veteran things. So the National Mental Health Board, I don't iron his shirts anymore. I haven't got time for that. But it was about just those small steps, just those incremental changes, and then being able to use the support. And that was actually then another big thing, and we sort of talked about this the other day, Alan, that for me, I had gone from this quite fiercely independent, empowered woman to then having to rely on others for support. And I found that very difficult. And I think it was quite a learning process about myself, and a gift now in hindsight looking back of actually having to rely on people. You know, there was a stage where I was in a wheelchair, I had to be bathed, someone else would have to dress me. I'd gone from being very physically capable, representing Australia in sports and Navy diving and all sorts of things, to now actually being immobilised with pain. And that step of having to accept that assistance was not something that came easily for me. But it was a gift in the process that now I am far more open and willing to accept that help of people to, you know, I don't have to do it all on my own. And I think that's maybe a lesson too, and helpful for people in the firegrounds is you don't have to do it all on your own. There are lots of people who want to support. It's about allowing them to help you. Giving them the permission. Yeah.
May I give you the neuroscience?
Please do.
Whatever's happened, and I've hit depression, it often has, as Maddie says, it's a shrinking level of field of awareness, and it often involves becoming inactive. The moment, and then Maddie said, I had to work out, I had to do something. And I think that's really, the moment we do physical movement, no matter how small or how often, physical movement increases the body's need for oxygen. So the more active we are, the more we breathe. The more we breathe, the more oxygen in the brain. The more oxygen in the brain, the more energy is produced. And the moment we do movement on a continuous basis, and I iron a shirt, by the time I'm finished ironing a shirt, there is a trickle of endorphins. And endorphins transmit and make us feel good. And if there's oxygen and endorphins and my feet are flat on the ground and I'm breathing, the endorphins will trigger dopamine. And dopamine and endorphins are two of the substances that cause you and me to feel good. Yeah. So movement and activity. You know, as Maddie said, she hit a point, she actually made a decision to move and do. Now, it just happened to be to and for or with somebody external. Now, the moment I give my attention external, my eyes are the predominant radar system in my nervous system. The moment Maddie's ironing a shirt, her feeling system shuts down, her movement and her visual irons the shirt. We're just calculatingly changing the system that's producing the dysfunction to something that'll make us more functional. And it's a beautiful, capturing that moment in time. You go, I was on the floor in the shower, and that's when I make the decision. And the decision, I promise you, is always to do. Yeah? Because action stimulates the chemistry that will make enjoyment, pleasure will kick in. Yeah.
We had a question over here. I'm sorry if you've still got a question, or have we gone round?
No, actually, yeah, thanks. It's actually pointedly about what we're talking about, because we're talking about the drought. I've been working with drought communities for the last 18 months, so they are probably feeling a little bit unloved now that everyone's raising money for the bushfires. And up in Queensland, a lot of the droughts weren't affected by the bushfires. The question was, because of this resilience, which Alan was talking about, and that they don't, or that past resilience, and they don't let themselves drop down. Therefore, they don't reach out for help. And because, sort of, it's almost a vicious circle.
Mhm.
So it's about trying, and you touched on the lack of the community, you know, sort of our custom to actually reach out and ask for help, especially in mental health areas. And the feedback we get out in community is that people continually say someone else is worse off than I.
Mm.
So it's actually, I'd like to get some ideas or thoughts of how we can cut through that to actually try to reach and say it's okay, have that message of it's okay to get help. But I guess that's the challenge of, if I ask for help, I'm already down, you know.
Yeah, that dichotomy.
Wow.
So to repeat the question for the audience out
long,
there,
eh?
yeah. How do we get, and I think this is a great question for you to answer, Alan, how do we get, do you see what I did there? I just,
And let me point out.
I'm learning a lot, right? Come along.
I'm also a linguist. So the literal words were that I had choice. Yeah, the non-verbals provided no choice whatsoever.
So the question was, how do we get the farming communities to ask for help, but at the same time keeping their resilience up, rather than feeling like if they've asked for help, then they've dropped their resilience?
Yep, yep. It goes back to the marathon. Yeah. Your northwestern Queenslanders have been running an ultra marathon. And as an ultra runner, and as somebody who 5 years ago had meningitis, and I suffered between 5.5, 8 out of 10 headaches, 24 hours a day for 3.5 years, during time that you and I worked together. And almost nobody realised that that was the case. I had between 40 and 42 migraine headaches 3 years in a row, on top of the 24 hours. And that process tested my ability to keep going. And I'm going to say something you're not going to enjoy, and it's not going to be the popular point of view. As a marathon runner, ultra marathon runner, 22 hours into the marathon, I don't want anybody giving me any advice under any circumstance, and I don't want you to go, it's okay for you to cry, because it's not okay for me to cry. 2 hours to go, I've just got to be going, there's only 700 metres to go. And I've got to have a degree of delusionary process to keep me going, because I don't know if it's 700 or I need 700 3 times or 10 times, because they've been doing it longer than they've ever done it before. And let me point out to you, they're doing that better than anybody else will be, and anybody who's not doing it, who gives them advice, needs to shut up. Yeah? See, the reason through that 3.5 years when I was suffering that amount of illness and pain and organising my funeral, first 2.5 years, Michael and I were the only two people who knew, other than the doctors. It's the last thing I needed was to manage somebody else's fear, doubt, concern, or desire to rescue Alan Parker. There'd have been a whole host of people who go, oh, what can I do? And I go, nothing. Particularly with those jerky gestures. Yeah. Yeah. See, and this is partly projection, but I wouldn't, I'm doing a lot of work with the farming communities at the moment. In fact, we're dealing with a native vegetation and native clearing on private land dispute that's been going on for years. And we're applying the same legislation to those variables despite the drought. So if you want to realise they're not down and out about being a farmer in drought, they're partly angry because we've got a piece of legislation that hasn't been updated to deal with the reality. Yeah. So it's not a time for them to be vulnerable. When it rains, then talk to them about their vulnerability. But the traditional people who go, oh, you've got to ventilate, you've got to let you... Not when you're running an ultramarathon, you don't. Yeah? All I want to do is go, how can I be in the best physical, mental, emotional state I can be in? And how can I be in the best state that I can be in to be with this person? And not give them advice. But just shower them with your own positive energy about what could be, what might be. Yeah. It's the minute we do certainty, they're going to... And they're pretty, most of the ones I've dealt with are pretty good. Yeah. Those of us who live in a city have no clue what resilience is, relatively to those people. Yeah. My favourite line is, how are you doing? And if they go, I'm all right, I go, wow, fantastic. We're too interested in taking them down into the problem. And they don't have any attention available to go there. They've just got to go, what are my best choices right now? Yeah. I've still got 68 cattle and I can get enough feeding for them for the next month. And if I can get a little bit extra feed, I can keep them there and maintain their weight. See, that's their current reality. Or I've sold them all off.
I think the key word there was choice.
Yeah.
It's about offering but giving them the choice.
Please don't give advice to people in distress. Under any circumstance. If you do nothing else, either shut up or ask what and how questions. And what would, could, might. Yeah, not what will. Don't do definitive language, would be my tip on it. Yeah.
Listen. Yeah.
Yep. How are we doing? Do we need to break?
Yeah, I think
so. We've gone over.
I'm not sure if we've got anyone hanging around over there.
Yeah.
There's a comment from Dubbo, somebody who visited Dubbo, right back last week, heartbreaking and just much gratitude for what you just said, guys.
How gorgeous.
Yeah.
Thank
Fantastic. Well,
to you.
Oh no, thank
Bless
you. Thanks for
how
this opportunity.
Superb. And on behalf of the EL group, can we say to Maddie, thank you.